when it has been started with chemistry, chemical engineering, but then it turned more and more into finance.
Sounds scientific to me. Geography guy. Politics.
It's interesting how in UK a lot of languages they have humanistic language or history or more general history. I didn't say anything about it, but sorry.
You're boosting your alumni association.
No, I think it's impressive.
Okay.
Another tradition.
So we have to So good morning, everybody. Welcome, and for most of you here, and for the people all around the world who are watching us, good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone, wherever you are located. So on behalf of SIA, that is the Swiss Impact Investment Association, we welcome you all, and thank you for coming today. We have very, very limited time, so I'll try to get as much things done as much as possible. Believe me, I'm more often as a speaker. I have a very limited experience as a moderator. So myself, I'm Ben Banerjee. I'm the president of SIA, and I will be the moderator today. And there are 3 SIA members present. 2 are sitting there, and the third one, I think, is in the... So that is Christian, Karin, and the third one is Rishika. She's beside. So if you guys have any questions, just go ahead and ask. Is the presentation? Perfect. So what is SIA and who are we? So we started 7 years ago in Zug with a vision to promote impact investment around the Swiss financial sector and to make investments the Switzerland as a center of the epicenter of impact investment around the world. To make things a bit different from the rest of the people here in the building bridges, I'll tell you we have 2 things. To start with, we act, not only just speak. So we put our money where our mouth is. Till today, we have trained thousands of professionals all around the world. We have trained financial institutions, businesses, on the topic of impact investment, but we have also supported hundreds of businesses around the world, from small SMEs to large businesses, with resources, whether it is funding, financing, operational, whatever. Secondly, this. You will soon notice technology and me, we don't go very well together. Secondly, we do not stay limited only with financial institutions and the government. We also have worked very strongly with the group who implements, and that is the business. We have been working together, and today I can say very easily we are by far the largest group of impact investors in Europe and the oldest in Switzerland, which doesn't say much, but anyway. We are just 7 years old in Switzerland. This is what I just said. We are supported by, I forgot to mention, we are supported very strongly by Canton of Zug, since we are based out of Zug. In SIA, we have 4 pillars. And how we do it with our partners. First, we are a platform of members. Like I mentioned, the largest impact investment group of Switzerland. We can say that we have if you put all our members together, we have 5 kind of members. One are the largest financial institutions, whether it is the Norwegian Sovereign Fund, European Investment Bank, pension funds from the Nordics, pension fund from the Benelux. Secondly, we have banks, asset managers, wealth managers, family offices. Thirdly, we have just businesses and funds and private members. Fourthly, we have families, a lot of old families from the west of Europe, from the German-speaking part of Europe, and even not only from Nordics, but even from US. So whether it's Rockefellers, Sparrows. So this is, and the last is, I think many of you may be aware that 4 years ago, I think approximately, we brought the head of 12 religions to Zug, and they committed a part of their assets for impact investment. So we are into that also. And lastly is the funds. So we are supporting a lot of funds all around Europe. We are also managing those. I mean, by managing, I don't mean administrative, but we are also, the allocation of the funds are into that. So these are the 4 pillars, what I can say our partners are. And one of the most important when I say private investors is that also it's businesses. So we have a lot of businesses. Although percentage-wise, as a member, it is smaller than the rest, but we have a lot of businesses, mainly SMEs, who are also either learning impact investment or want to be part of it or are already impactful. So this is where we stand with our members. Our next are who are our partners. Of course, to be able to implement all what we do, we need partners. And we have partners. So we have basically 4 kinds of partners. Like I mentioned, the first one is the Chamomile. Second one is our education. This, I said, we are educating financial institutions, SMEs. Thirdly, we have the TV show, which became very, very famous in the last 1.5 years, which started with the idea to make impact investment a site to increase the awareness of impact investment around the world. But today, we have been using this TV show also to get attention, branding, and also financial support investments for our funds, for our businesses, and for the funds we are supporting. But the red line always is it has to be impactful. We do not touch anything which is not impactful. And in this, I really keep on hammering. We are also involved with the National Advisory Board of Switzerland. We do not negotiate or we do not speak on anything which is not impactful. So that is, in that way, we are really pure player. Lastly is the certification. We certify businesses, whether they are impactful or not. And then we come to the next one. This is about, so how are we managing ourselves being such a small group? We partner with very, very strong organizations. So we are partnering with the UNDP, UNEP, EIB, I already mentioned, Dutch Nordic pension funds, impact funds, Al Gore's bridge funds, religious funds, and more. Secondly, we have been supporting conversion of charities and religious funds. I am sure many of you are aware that there's a lot of conversion going on at this moment, which philanthropic organizations are looking more and more into impact. And they're either converting their assets, they're changing it from philanthropy to impact. We work with a lot of Swiss embassies around the world who are promoting us, supporting us in going through that. Finally, we are working with the GSG, the National Advisory Boards of Impact Investment around the world. For example, Japan, Finland, Holland, India, UK, Germany, Taiwan, South Korea, but also with the impact investment boards of these countries. And of course, we are working with Dutch organizations. I think most of these names everybody knows. And this is not only Dutch, but also with the Finnish organizations, with the German organizations, and all that. Our activities are easy. We educate and promote impactful businesses and funds. That's what we have been doing from day one. We have been supporting businesses who are doing something impactful, whether it's on climate change, whether it's on agriculture, the whole spectrum of it since the day one. Then we educate financial sectors on the topic of impact investment, how to create impactful portfolios, sustainable portfolios, but this has been a long time we have been active with it. Like I mentioned, we are advising a couple of governments. We are also involved with the Swiss Regulatory Board on how to promote and support and facilitate impact investments using regulations. Last of all, we used to have very big international impact investment summits in Zug, where hundreds of people came from all over the world, including world leaders. But since COVID, the last 2 years, we didn't do it, but I think from next year, we start again. So this has been quite very well known around the world. Very shortly about me, so that's my email address. In any case, if you guys have any questions, ask it to our colleagues here. Otherwise, you can always send me an email, contact me. Just a little bit, I'm born in India, grew up in Holland. I don't know if anybody is here from Netherlands. They will, then you will be recognizing the Q7 wind park. So I was the initiator and one of the early investors in that. And then from there, we went to biogas, biodiesel, and then we spread further and further and further. And today, we are basically in every sector you can imagine. Speak around the world at the WEF, UN, whatever. I have been speaking about climate change impact investment since a long time. So this is a bit boring, I think. Yeah, I have written, I teach, whatever. So what I wanted to say is our planet at this moment is in a danger. It's really burning. Whether we are talking about the war, whether we are talking about environment, destruction, loss of biodiversity, climate change. A friend of mine, Dr. Petri Talas, who is the Secretary General of WMO, he mentioned that we have been repeating this the last few years. Bad news, bad news, bad news. And the news are getting bigger and bigger. Unfortunately, it's not helping very much. So that's why today I thought what we should do is just show some hope and share some good news. Because what are we doing and what we have to do, because we have to get people moving. A friend of mine, I think most of you may not be knowing, Dr. Pachauri, who created IPCC, who got the Nobel Prize for it, who passed away, he had mentioned also, since I think 1960s or 70s, about climate change. Then we have other people who have been mentioning about climate change. Nothing has happened. In fact, the situation is getting worse. Our CO2 emission, everything. So we have to all get together and work at it. We have to save this planet, especially for not only for our children, but also for ourselves. If you look at the frequency and everything of the national global disasters, it's increasing. So the positive side is here in Switzerland, we manage one of the largest assets in the world. And Switzerland, I was in the NAB meeting 2 days ago. I was told, I was a bit surprised with that the maximum or the largest percentage of money going to impact investment is going via Switzerland. I assume it is because of the Swiss banking facilities. But still, the amount is very small. If you look at the global asset under management of 154 trillion US dollar, of which 40 trillion is sustainable and ESG, and I am told that 2.3 trillion is going into impact investment. Okay, I have some question marks on that, but anyway, that's a different topic. Majority of the impact investment goes to emerging market, but still it's relatively a very, very small part in the global aspect. The reason I think why it is like that is the issue remains the perception. Somehow, despite of all the evidences showing otherwise, most Swiss investment officers still look at emerging market as a high-risk area. And secondly, they do not yet, in my opinion, understand the real risk of social and environmental damages. Luckily, luckily with an apostrophe, pandemics like the COVID, the war in Ukraine has started slowly giving a shock to the financial system, making them more aware of what is going on. So maybe they should start taking this risk also under management, that if we do not look into this may be an issue. So we have to keep cautious on this. And where I worry a bit, and especially after all these meetings and everything, is that we still see that a lot of financial institutions, many of which are also our members, are trying to pack old products in new bottles, saying it's an old, it's a completely different discussion, but they are taking old, vague or not clear structured products, financial products, branding it impact, branding it sustainable. So we have to always stay aware of it. And we all know that financial sectors often need external nudges before it transforms. But the advantage is that the governments in advanced countries often have more influence on financial sectors than we think or than most of us imagine. For example, they can enforce transparency on the financial sectors, which is good, by the way, for us, because then we can not only measure, but we can also compare impact investments and their activities. So in conclusion, I invite you all to join our ecosystem of entrepreneurs, investors, financial institutions, governments, and service providers to support this transformation of assets into impact investment. So now I have to go to the speakers, who are really, we have amazing speakers today. Two of them are global change makers. They're leaders who initiated many terms and organizations you're talking about. Since two of them are situated really very far away, one in Mauritius, one in India, so we decided not to give out the CO2 emission, to save the CO2 emission, so that we should be joining them virtually. So one of them is Dr. Khosla. I don't know if he's already there. Is he there? So we all speak about sustainability. Both of them. Oh, perfect. So we all speak about sustainability. I'll tell you, well, Dr. Khosla is the person who invented that word. At least he was in the room when this word was created. Also words like global warming, carbon emission, he was there. So he's the first executive director of UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program. He's also the former president of the Club of Rome, president of IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. I assume all of you know. And more interestingly, he founded Development Alternatives, the world's first social enterprise for innovation and large-scale application for appropriate technology with direct relevance for eradicating poverty. And I have no idea how many other organizations he heads. So with this, I hand it over to Dr. Khosla. Welcome, Dr. Khosla. This floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Oh, okay. Now you should be able to see my screen. Can you confirm that you have the title slide of my presentation? Okay. Thanks, Ben. Just one little correction. I wasn't executive director of UNEP. I was a director in UNEP way back when it first started. But I appreciate your introduction. I just want to say that basically my job today is to work in a business-like approach, which is why we call ourselves a social enterprise, to do things that are good for the economy, for the society, as well as for environment. So broad areas of concern, if you like, are people, planet, and prosperity, but in that order. And our feeling is that the current economic system and the geopolitical system are not geared to doing that, and neither governments nor business even consider it their responsibility to deal with these issues in the way and manner and speed that are needed, and certainly the scale. And civil society, the NGOs and the voluntary organizations, which are dedicated to dealing with them, don't unfortunately have the scale. The scale comes from the marketplace and from the ability of governments to raise votes and to raise taxes, and they are able to deal with the issues of scale, but not necessarily in the right direction. So what I did in 1982, 40 years ago, was to try and combine the strengths of these three sectors, the government, the business, and the civil society, their respective strengths into one kind of organization that would then be able to deal with the societal issues in a manner that was needed, but with the ability to scale up using market forces and the ability to speed things up by using the motivations that drive business and governments. So this is basically what it's all about. The organization I work with is called Development Alternatives, and it's basically been set up to deal with the crises. The title of your series today is Dealing with Crisis, and here is something that will describe not just one crisis, but many. Extreme, debilitating poverty, population growth, pollution, climate change, varieties of issues on resource destruction and resource scarcity. And of course, even the economy takes a beating. Now, we live together on one planet, and our individual and societal and national well-being does depend on the well-being of others. So we have to recognize that an unfair, unjust, and lopsided world is not only not in the interest of the ones who got left behind, but actually not in the interest of even those who made good progress. This is a description of the global inequality. This was in 2007. We're talking about 15 years ago, and things have got much worse. I call it the bar stool approach. Before that, in 1992, UNDP published a human development report with a champagne glass on its cover, which showed the 2080 rule of the economy. 20% of the world's people were getting 80% of the income, and vice versa. 80% of the world's people were getting only 20% of the world's income. It got worse within 15 years from 1992 to 2007. We were not talking about 20 and 80, we were talking about 1 and 99. We were talking about how unequal the world was. And by the year 2018, just before COVID hit, just 42 people on this planet owned as much wealth as the bottom half of the economy. So we're facing a pretty unequal, unjust, unfair world, which has an implication for all of us, whether we're rich or poor. And to tell you the truth, the last 4 years through the pandemics, things got even worse. There are now actually twice, almost 1.5 times as many billionaires as there were at the beginning of COVID. And frankly, the world not becoming more equal or fair. So the global problem is inequity, the widespread poverty and jobless growth that we have adopted, and we've got to deal with it. And the bottom half of it, which we might call a disease of poverty, povertitis, is really a place where consumption is much below the levels of any decent human life. We have people like this woman who works in an area that my own organization works in. And what you see here is everything that woman and her family possesses in that picture. In fact, you might even say the whole world of hers is in that picture. And when you look at these kids, you wonder how many Maria Calases or Nobel Prize winners have been lost because they never had an opportunity to get a decent education or be able to take part in the national economy. People in the village, people in cities, people without water, people basically with very little to eat. This is an entire family of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people who live on the food that they have in front of them for a whole week. So you have hunger, you have deprivation, and you have a permanent poverty trap where the family size keeps on increasing with no income, resource destruction, no markets, virtually always basically caught in this trap. And that leads to refugees, that leads to displacement, this leads to more and more people having to leave their homes and going away. And this young girl with her 2 brothers, there's one in her lap, is simply asking, how can I contribute to my nation's development? And she's really, quite rightly, rather furious. And if one isn't outraged by the look and feel of this young family, and I don't know what one can expect. Then there is the second problem, which is the problem of environmental forces. We are generating huge quantities of waste, pollution, and diseases, and destroying our life support systems, our climate, our biodiversity, our ecosystems. They're all basically under massive onslaught and threat. And that is essentially about affluenza, the other related disease with povertitis. The two actually seem to go together. If you draw the curves over time, they're quite parallel, and it's quite apparent that one causes the other. You don't have to be a Marxist to realize that over consumption is really the other side of the same coin of underconsumption. Now, what we've got to do is to deal with these kinds of issues. The overconsumption has led to climate change, to desertification, to forest fires, to so-called natural disasters, to, I'm sorry, I don't know where that came from, okay, to floods and crop pests. There is some kind of a problem which I'm trying to deal with. Natural disasters, exponential, it's a hockey stick, growing the last century from virtually none to huge numbers every year, including in some of the most advanced countries. Extinction of species. Here is a rosy periwinkle. It grows in a few hectares of land in Madagascar. Once this species disappears, the only known source of cure for childhood leukemia disappears. And we really have major problems of extinction. I mean, you see this bluefin tuna, which is caught in the wild. It sold about 3 years ago for $2 million, one fish. So you can see that we've got a very lopsided world, not just in terms of poverty, but in terms of what we're doing to our ecosystems. And that in turn is having an impact on the financial systems. No matter how well off you are, you would know that we're dealing in a very interconnected world. And what happens in one part of it really has an impact on the other. And this affluenza is not only an economic disease, it's also a physical disease. It leads to things like COVID. It leads to things like influenza of various types and destructive natural disasters, pandemics that no one, rich or poor, can escape. And povertitis, on the other hand, leads to loss of identity and alienation and terrorism that also affects all of us. So these are very complex and interrelated issues, and there are no silver bullets. There's no way that you can just solve them by either throwing money at them or changing a law here or a regulation over there. They need to be dealt with on a much, much deeper level. So there are many hard problems, but there are solutions, and the global community, 195 heads of state, got together in New York in 2015 and agreed that there were things that they could do that would manifestly change the way the global economy is going. And these were the 17 SDGs, and the world has made a commitment to them. And although I personally don't believe that they will solve all our problems, they are certainly a minimum. They certainly are a necessary condition, if not sufficient, to get us where we're going. So there are two kinds of problems: poverty and deprivation and being left behind. And on the other hand, ecological breakdown, resource destruction, scarcity, and so on. And we're looking for solutions. And there are two types of basic solutions that my own organization, that I personally have been devoting my life to. I wouldn't say they're the only ones, but these are the two that seem to us to be the most likely to change the way things go. The one first is technological innovation, and I don't really mean technology in the form of space age, Silicon Valley technology. I'm talking about technologies that help solve the basic needs of people and create jobs for them, livelihoods for them on a long-term basis. This is the headquarters of my own organization in South Delhi. It's made almost entirely out of waste materials, fly ash from power stations, stone dust from mines, and a variety of other things that we really have to use in order to avoid massive destruction of our resources. So planet, people, and profits, who my organization has developed over the last nearly 4 decades, innovations of a wide variety of solutions for water management and land management and low-cost housing, jobs, varieties of different things. These are all appropriate and good for the context for which they were designed. Low-cost housing, mini grids with solar or wind energy, wasteland regeneration. Here is a piece of land that we took and converted it into a forest within 15 months with a total investment of about 50 euros per hectare. The return on investment is over 100% on that investment in terms of the value of greenery generated. These are check dams. My organization's put together, made about 500 of these in central India. And they are remarkable because they produce irrigation and power and groundwater recharge. And the economics is amazing. The return on investment is over 200%. Ecological benefits, social benefits, the global benefits to carbon emissions and to biodiversity. If you add them all up, we're talking about 500-600% returns. But of course, these are infrastructure projects, and the people who get the benefits are not necessarily the people who make the investments. And that's why organizations and governments have to come into play in order to make sure that these get done. The headquarters I was telling you about is an example of how we do that. And then the solution number 2 are business innovations, innovations in business models. And we believe that the future of much of the third world, of the global south, depends on sustainable enterprise development. Local, small enterprises that service the local community with basic needs, make money and bring the local economy up. And these are ones that we've done a lot of work with. This is a handmade paper recycling factory. Again, if you look at the returns on investment there, the payback period for this factory was 1 year. And the investment brings back financial returns of 200%, but ecological and social and global returns of an amazing amount. This is what Ben refers to as impact. The green stuff is what you might call the impact. The red stuff is what you might call financial returns. We've done this with integrated fisheries and poultry enterprises, where the wastes of one become the feed for the other. Vermicomposting, fertilizer by earthworms, amazing electric rickshaw units. This particular one was set up by women primarily to take their kids, their young daughters to school. But once they had it, they became major transporters within the community, and they make a lot of money. And now this woman in the top right, who set it up about 5 years ago, has now got about 12 or 13 employees, mostly men and some women. And she's a real entrepreneur. She's a social entrepreneur making a good return on her 1,000 euro investment. A systems approach to sustainable development needs measurement, and we try to do that so that investors can see how much returns there are in terms of the impacts which are on this diagram, the amount of energy created, the amount of basic needs provided to people, the number of trees saved, etc. The new approach to jobs for a sustainable future will need a green or circular economy, zero emissions, recycling, waste to wealth, and it will have to be bottom up, really, in many places, and it must deal with both growth and equity. So how do we scale it up? You need new marketing systems, you need the internet, social media, as much as you need these appropriate frugal technologies, financing mechanisms, technology support, delivery and supply chains. These are the enablers. And SIA seems to me to be in a terrific position to help establish such enablers. These enablers then catalyze the generation of many, many different kinds of enterprises. My dream has been to set up local hubs, which we are hoping to do, which basically provide a place for men and women in the neighborhood to be able to come and buy and sell their products, to get basic skills, to get services, to get medical treatment or diagnosis at least, financial services, education, and training. Once we've done this for the last 4 decades nearly, we've learned basically that a stronger financing system is needed for micro, small, and medium enterprises. And frankly, there's a missing gap there, which nobody thinks about. Micro are these household financing systems or enterprises, which are very important. They're usually household, and they create new opportunities often for women in villages to make some money. But the real job creators, the real money spinners are the ones that employ 5 to say 50 people, the ones that have an investment of somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 euros. And these are the ones that really are the missing link. And they don't figure in any financing system. Nobody really talks about mini enterprises, but that's where the real action is. Strong technical and marketing support, obviously, in order to make it work. Strong civil society and motivating and mobilizing this kind of entrepreneurship. Strong government and foundation support, in particular financial and policies.
Ashok, can I cut you for a sec because we are running out of time very fast?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm just finished.
Yeah,
what
perfect.
We need
Thanks.
Is a sense of outrage and urgency before it's too late. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry I've taken more time.
No. Thank you. Thank you, Ashok. So please keep your questions for the moment. We can go over it at the end. Our next guest is Her Excellency Professor Dr. Amina Gori Fakim. She's, I don't know where to start. She's the 6th President of Mauritius, the founding member of the Pan-African Association of African Medicinal Plants. She's the chairperson of the International Council for Scientific Union, Regional Office for Africa. She has authored and edited, 30 plus books. She speaks all around the world, and she has been awarded, if I go through the list of awards, I will be busy the next 6 minutes, I think, from the Commander of Star to UNESCO, African Union Commission Award for Women. But what I found most interesting is that she is the first among the top 100 women in Africa, Forbes list, 2017 and 19, and as one of the Foreign Policy 2015 global thinkers. So, Amina, I don't know where to stop, so I'll just say, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for associating me with this very important event. And so I'm sorry, I have just landed just now, about half an hour ago. So if you excuse me if I don't sound too coherent, but I will try to do my best. I'm just going to compliment what Dr. Khoshla has just mentioned. I think he gave a very sweeping overview of what the problem is and also what the potential solutions may be. But I will come in from an island perspective because islands, small island developing states, they tend to be neglected on the global agenda. And I will try and point out as to why we need to take these islands seriously. And because I think we are a bearer of solutions, as opposed to just being this insignificant landmass, spotted confetti around the world. And Dr. Khoshla has just talked about the SDGs. And I think in September 2015, as part of its agenda for the next 15 years, I think the UN and the 195 states, they adopted the set of the SDGs. And I think they are the most sweeping, ambitious program ever undertaken by a global organization. And I also personally feel that these 17 SDGs constitute our pledge to deliver on the promises made when countries ratified the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. But anyway, that's another story. But I think their very name, sustainable, they point to a limitation inherent in them. Because to reach them, we are going to have to use resources that are more carefully stewarded than before, and in ways that are more effective than before. And I think 2030 is already tomorrow. And I think we have seen how the world has backslided on many of these potential gains that we could have made reaching 2030, but we're not there. And I don't think we're going to be there. But nonetheless, in some of the SDGs, I think we are in a position to make a dent. I think in the course of successive COP meeting and also in the IPCC document on climate, scientists have been drawing attention to the various climate models, and they all point to the inevitable warming of the planet and the accompanying calamities to the environment and to all the indicators that are keeping alive and well on this planet. And I think we don't have to go very far. Last week was Florida, last month it was Pakistan and Nigeria, and I think the list will go on. So a recent wave of forest fires as well, flooding due to melting of the glaciers, more violent hurricanes, and this is what we fear in the small island states, owing to warmer oceans, the rise of sea level, the acidification of the oceans, the waterways, the bleaching of our corals are all slowly but surely leading to the destruction of life on Earth. And this is where we come in terms of the diversity of the ecosystem. And one thing I think may have been missed by many of the policymakers and the financiers in the world is that we are very much interconnected in this world, right? We are part of this diverse ecosystem. And we are interconnected not just to ourselves, to the various, the various groups living around the world, the various genetic makeup of our own people, but also to the other living creatures within the planetary boundaries that ensure that the livelihood of all creatures, great and small, on this planet. And as has been said, I hail from a small island state. And we are part, when I say we, I mean Republic of Mauritius forms part, along with the Mascarene Archipelago, one of the global biodiversity hotspots in the world. And I reiterate, these small island and biodiversity hotspots, around 45 of them, they occupy less than 2% of the planet's surface. So why do they matter? One would be tempted to ask. How would the world be different if we were to disappear altogether? I think if you look at a small island like Tuvalu, I think they are already the poster child of a warming climate, of a warming world, because the water level is rising. And we see very soon Maldives. And I think the president there has been very innovative when he actually positioned the message that very soon he will have his cabinet meeting underwater. But it does matter. And I will briefly explain why, and as to where the investment that we will be having should be going to some of these areas, because it will ensure our livelihoods on this planet. Just to give some figures, I think to make it even more poignant, is that 1 square kilometer of a biodiversity hotspot has more biodiversity than the entire European continent put together. I mean, that is telling. Now, again, why should we care about the species living in so far away places? Well, if you look at the ocean, we find that coral reef home to 25% of marine biodiversity, and they ensure the livelihoods of about 12% of the planet for their proteins. As a scientist, I can tell you that we've just seen the wave of pandemic. We've just seen COVID. We are witnessing also increasingly antibiotic resistance. We will have to go back to the drawing board. And the industry, and of course the academic institution, will always go back to nature, to these exotic creatures that inhabit this ecosystem, because they are the supplier of new leads, new molecules. And we have seen how many creatures, sea sponges, plants from the exotic rainforest, for example, they are the source of these leads. Now, if you couple these indigenous endemic plant species or animal species with traditional knowledge, you have a plethora of molecules, of extracts that can be the solutions for the future. And of course, we mustn't forget that the ocean, we are all connected to the ocean because it provides us with the air and the air we breathe and the water we drink. And terrestrial biodiversity underpins our survival on this planet, providing us with food, medicine, fiber, and so many ecosystemic services. I think Professor Dasgupta rightly pointed out in his very nice article, it was in Nature, when he says that nature gives us $100 trillion in ecosystemic services every year for free. And we seem to be taking that for granted. So that seminal paper, the agricultural economics, has to be really looked at. So to sustain our livelihood on Earth, where are the sectors, I feel, in the immediate to near future, where we'll need sustainable financing, and this will tally with the SDGs. I will just touch on a few subjects. I think Dr. Khoshla has given some very granular data as well as to in this sector, but I'll just give some guidelines as to which of the sectors which I consider to be very, very important. One of them, of course, is agriculture. And it is the economic sector which is most vulnerable to climate change. And the main impact of climate change on this sector will include the decline of global yields of crops, such as rice, wheat, maize, the traditional ones, soybean, and also the direct and the indirect impacts of farm animals and the increased prevalence of pests, weeds, and diseases, all these because of a changing climate. And we have seen recently when the Ukraine war started, how the specter of famine was actually waged across the world with diminished output in terms of wheat coming out from that part of the world. And we have seen also, having said this, agriculture may benefit from moderate climate change. We have seen some experiment being carried out in France when they were doing a study on wheat being grown in certain climatic condition, and then sorghum, for example, being grown. You saw that the results were astounding for the sorghum yield. So the positive impact are increased productivity in some crops due to carbon dioxide fertilization and longer growing period season in high altitude. So there is scope for adaptation for these changes. Therefore, it's quite big. But many adverse impacts can be reduced or spread out by crop insurance, investment in new capital, changes of crop planting dates and farming practices. Of course, this is undergirded with access to capital and access to technology. So there is another issue that we have to look at is reversing market distortion, public policies, such as heavily subsidized water supply, because the next war increasingly is being said is going to be a water war. So increased water supply and agriculture, implementing policies that promote the development of heat and drought-resistant crop, that could go a long way to facilitate adaptation to agriculture. And we mustn't forget that with the rising sea level, there will be, of course, seawater which are going to go into land, making the environment much more of a brackish water. So crop that can adapt to this brackish water will be highly desirable. So there again, we need to relook at the investment in this sector. The second part is where I come from, is the coastal zone. They are especially exposed to climate change, prone to inundation, storm damage. And what do we see through sea surges and backwater effect is wetland loss. Unfortunately, this is also occasioned by, of course, construction. So this leads to erosion, saltwater intrusion in surface and groundwater, rising water table, and of course, impeded drainage. We saw that recently in Florida. So we need to invest more and more in the protection of coastal zone. And it's also mainly by providing the public good, coastal defense, surge barriers, saltwater intrusion barriers, And this, therefore, requires significant government intervention, but of course, with the appropriate framework of investment. That will be another reason why government involvement in the need for environmental management, either directly or by government agencies, or by creating relevant markets for environmental goods and services. And here there are some very nice examples coming out from island states. We have seen recently how the Seychelles, they actually adopted a policy with some of the multilateral organizations where they actually went into debt swap. So they protect the environment. They do, they're the poster child for the conservation. And of course, the debt was written off or underwritten by some of these multilateral organizations. So land use planning will be another important policy instrument to ensure adaptation in coastal zone. I don't think I need to say much more on health, because people around the world are likely to suffer substantial health damages in a number of adverse climate change scenarios. But the main impact of climate change on health will include higher incidence of heat stress and heat-related mortality, counterbalanced by, to some extent, by fewer winter deaths. So again, a huge investment will need to be done in vector-borne diseases, malaria, dengue fever. We have seen, of course, recently chikungunya, and many of these diseases are directly linked to a changing climate as well. So many of these threats can be addressed by changing behavior and migration patterns. Policy-relevant adaptation options include vector control program, pharmaceutical research and development, disease eradication program, and so this is one area. So one more area is water resources. Again, I highlight this because water is becoming a source of tension, especially cross-boundary, and of course, countries where the water resource is shared. We're seeing recent tension in Africa recently, but this is happening in many places in Asia as well. So the bulk of regional climate change impact will mostly likely to be related to water, either lack of it or too much of it at a given place and time. So the indications are that there will be a change in the volume, timing, quality of water flows, increasing rainfall variability, frequent severe water shortages. So therefore, adapting the water sector would necessarily involve changes in water demand, loss reduction, rational water use. So what are the necessary adaptations that will be undertaken by the private sector? Will include regulated water utilities. Still, there is substantial scope for policy measures, such as regulatory incentives, ensuring correct price signals, and of course, facilitating financing scheme. But another area which has been seen, which is of course working very well, is recycling. And I've just come from Dubai and I see how they're doing a big effort into the recycling. Ecosystem services I've just mentioned, and adaptation policy should focus on increased ecosystem resilience, habitat protection, changes in natural resource management, and all these toward the proper functioning of market for ecosystem services. So settlement and economic activity. So the main impact of climate change in this area could be malfunctioning infrastructure. And this is again where there is call for massive investment, redirection of tourist flows, migration, change in population dynamics, and higher energy demand for space cooling, again, through compensated for by a drop in winter heating demand. Of course, the equation has changed now. We're going to see what's going to be the impact of all this energy policy for the next winter in Europe. So adaptation, therefore, will make infrastructure climate resilient, implementing adequate building code, land zoning, and discourage settlement in areas which are prone to be, of course, of climate risk. So to conclude, a common thread connecting the adaptation options discussed is the necessity of functioning environmental market, undistorted pricing, efficient insurance, smart government intervention to encourage adaptation. And in real-world economies, it cannot be taken for granted that the full set of adaptation options will exist, or that private and public decision market will choose them. Having said this, the economic model must return to the notion of adaptation as a generic response to a changing climate and assume that optimal adaptation decisions will be made, because this will allow us to focus on key factors shaping the trade-offs between adaptation and mitigation. And of course, if all is undergirded with the appropriate investment, impact investment, and I'm sure that we will be more hopeful by 2030 to see to it that at least some of the SDGs have been met. Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you so very much. I had forgotten to mention, she's also among the 100 most powerful women on earth. Now I know why it is. So what I wanted to say is now, after listening to these two leaders on this topic, I would also invite two persons who are going to speak also on the ground level. So we are talking about impactful businesses and impactful funds. So let's start with the fund first. When I heard Andrew's story, the first question that came to my mind is, why hasn't anybody done that before? I mean, it is so logical, so it's absolutely rational and logical. So Andrew is going to speak about restitution of stolen assets, which I think, Amina, will be very interesting for you too. He will tell everything himself. He's a senior counsel, English law solicitor, and in one of the world's largest law firm. And he has worked on many high value, including 1 billion plus transactions. So his fund is one of the most interesting fund, which in our point of view is an impactful fund. So welcome, Andrew. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Yes, I'm going to bring us straight back to earth with what I think is probably the most impactful investment opportunity you've never heard of, which is in the world of the recovery and return of stolen patrimony. If someone could put the next slide on, please. Or do I press that? Okay. Very good. So what's the problem? This is the issue. There's many of us will sort of vaguely know about this area. There is a enormous amount of illicit financial flows that are flowing out of mostly the global south. It's been estimated by various people at about $1 trillion a year. That is, and the way we think about that in restitution is that as an untapped asset class. But to give you some sense of the scale of this, these illicit financial flows, they account for about 5% of Africa's GDP. This is not, by the way, a story just about Africa, but we're focusing on Africa for a couple of good reasons. It represents about 12% of trade and nearly 200% of official development assistance, and these are slightly old from 2018. But a staggering point coming from that is that Africa would be a net creditor if the IFFs were halted and ideally reversed, which I think is a staggering statistic. So what I'm here to offer is an opportunity for you guys to invest in corruption, which may sound like an odd concept, but that's what we're about. How do we do that? This is a turning on the head of the idea of corruption, because really what has happened over the last decades is that many countries have had accrued to them vast, untapped, offshore assets. It's almost like every country that we're talking about has offshore energy resources, oil, gas, etc., but in the form of these kinds of stolen assets that we talk about. They're identifiable. We know where they are. They form securities, real estate, cash, etc. They're all around the world, often in the large global financial centres such as London, where I am based, but probably here as well, and sadly in many of the island communities that we're hearing about. But there's also a bunch of legal rights that accrue with these assets: misappropriation, corruption, fraud, tort, breach of contract, ownership rights, NPLs, non-performing loans, judgments that have already been handed down but never enforced. These together collect as a kind of asset class, and that's what there's an opportunity to invest in and recover for the countries that have lost them. And how does that work? Well, it's actually an old solution called litigation funding. It's not new. This has been around for a while. And it's got a very bad reputation in some ways, but we're turning all of that on its head and really making litigation funding a force for good. We fund all the costs of the recovery. This model that we've built takes a share of the successful returns. The restitution is in fact the first in market and currently the only opportunity to look at this asset class. And we're funded by a number of different sources, donors, impact-focused funders, and they get kind of unique impact returns. I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But in this time of crisis, this could be one of the most impactful and forceful ways of returning or creating wealth for countries that are in desperate need of cash in these times of crisis. But our commercial investors do actually get an excellent financial return as well, and that's a critical point to make, and it's why we're attracting so much interest and attention. So let's talk about the impact. The impact is that the potential to return billions of dollars to emerging markets countries, and it's highly aligned with ESG and SDG goals. Importantly, we work with the governments that we work with, and we work cross political divides with governments and opposition players, and we align with their prosperity agendas, and we return assets in a way which is very much aligned with the way that STAR and the UN look at the recovery of assets. But we do so with the countries. We build capacity. The idea is that actually we put ourselves out of business, and that the agencies, the lawyers, the commissions that we work with in the countries learn, develop, and actually do this for themselves in a short time. So everything we do is building capacity in that regard. We're the G in ESG. There's a typo there. But we're also highly aligned with SDG 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. That's the least invested in SDG, actually, because there are very few opportunities to do so. But it's potentially one of the most important ones, and hopefully it's sort of self-apparent why we align with that. And what are we? We're an experienced team of leaders from the worlds of law, investigation, governance, human rights, rule of law, finance. We work with the leading law firms, investigatory firms. We have proprietary software. We're working with AI, machine learning. We're bringing together a lot of things. Maybe one of the reasons why we're, in answer to Ben's question, why is nobody doing this before? It's not that easy. You need a really incredible group of people and skill sets in order to achieve it. And that's what we've got. I'm conscious that we are needing to make up time, so I might move fairly quickly to just talk about impact again, and to talk about what we call the multiplier effect of what we're doing. Really, we are working with government and donor seed funders that are able to put in, I haven't put the amounts in here, but it's relatively small amounts that are seeding what we're doing. We've got donors already doing some of the paying for some of the initial investigations, where maybe it's a bit speculative and difficult to get commercial funding for that. And we're working with donors for that. Small amounts that can then build into other ways of supporting us with such things such as capital guarantees, insurance, etc. Relatively small outlays of commitment. And all of those, both of those two areas start to crowd in the commercial funding. And these are the numbers for our first fund, 125 million, and that's at-risk capital. And those are the investors that are getting the kind of strong returns that I talked about. But they're the catalytic capital that comes in before that, relatively small, but we're crowding in commercial funding. And then it really starts to be impactful as we start to see the recoveries coming back. So the way this works, more or less in our model, is that for 125 million of committed capital, we ought to be able to return something in the region of 1.5 billion to our sovereign partners, recoverable through enforcement of civil law rights that I talked about before, and the repatriation. And then the impact, I mean, it's really much more than just the 1.5 billion that we put there, or whatever the number is, the large number of recoveries. And in fact, it's sort of incalculable, because many of these countries are struggling to work with international bodies that are reluctant to invest in them because of their histories of not tackling their own historic bribery and corruption. Well, this is the answer. This is the solution. So they start to actually see their credit ratings start to fall because people are, governments and investors are much more willing to invest if they know that the country is tackling this problem. So it's the empowerment also of the capacity building that we are doing is sort of incalculable. So there's a huge multiplier effect there. And it's profitable. We're running short of time, but roughly speaking, and you sort of saw it in the figures in the previous slide, it's roughly going to cost about 6 to 10% of the estimated recoveries in terms of litigation costs. And we run ourselves like a normal fund, and there are fees for the management fees, etc. But the key point from this slide is that we seek to recover at least 75% of what we recover goes straight back to the country via our managed return structures. And we always target to get that as high as we can, and we do that by mitigating the risks of our investors in various ways. So we are profitable. As I've mentioned, a unique opportunity to support SDG 16. The target 16.4, you may or may not know, specifically looks at recovery of stolen and return of stolen assets, and one of the indicators is the total value of inward and outward illicit financial flows. We're not about stopping the output, but we are very much about improving the returns. And sustainably reduce corruption and bribery is SDG target 16.5, and develop accountable, transparent institutions. That's exactly what we're about. So 16.6 is ticked. We work with various people, so my law firm's up there, but we work with others as well. Very, very supportive. These guys love to work with us. Lots of pro bono support. We've had about 20 million of just pure time and effort and work from a number of our partner organisations, and we're hugely grateful to them. But we've also had donations from people like Oak Foundation and the Government of Canada, UK, etc. We also have on the board a director of emerging markets from the London Stock Exchange. The UK is very much behind this, and that's me. And that's a very important disclaimers, and you can ignore. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So for all those who don't know, he flew all the way from England today for this event, despite of him being today his birthday. So happy birthday. Our next speaker is Johan. He will be speaking on behalf of business. His company is active in Africa, and the work he's doing is really amazing. He's the founder of Dynamis and has a background in international petrochemical business, which is very, very self-contradictory, but I'll let you take over.
Well, thank you, Ben. That probably means that I am familiar with the big, complex projects and those things. So thank you for letting me speak here today. And do we have my presentation up? Thank you. Great, thank you. As Ben said, I'm the founder of Dynamis, and I will be speaking about investing in times of crisis and how to maximize the impact. There's a crisis going on. Oh, what to do? Should I wait to invest? Should I do it differently this time? Maybe I don't do anything now, and then I decide something next year. And because this is probably a very special time of crisis as well. Or maybe not. That is always a crisis going on. I've listed here 2 dozens of crises the last 60 years, and there is probably at least double of it that I didn't write up there. And of course, there will be a new crisis next year and next year again, etc., etc. But still, the world has done a lot of progress the last 60 years. I've listed some of the good progress here. We have reduced poverty. We had peak poverty. Now, when I write poverty here, it's the extreme poverty. Those were described earlier by my Indian colleague, where they have very, very, very little to live on. That peaked in 1970, and 50 years after, it had been drastically reduced. Of course, now when we had the COVID, some of that backslided, but I'm sure that we will, with combined efforts, we will drive this further again. Polio, we had a peak polio in 1980. That is nearly erased. We have made more people to have access to fresh water, and there is a long way to go because it's still 2 billion people that don't have access, and even access might mean that they have water in the morning but not in the evening, etc., etc. And we also heard by our colleague in Mauritius that water will be a big problem in the future as well. So there is still a lot of things to do, but how to do that? It has turned out that it's nearly impossible to time your investment and say, well, now I'm doing it, and the next day I will not do it, etc., etc. So the best thing to do is to invest in long-term impact, invest constantly in the efforts, in the actions, in the things that do long-term impact. Regardless if the economy is going up and down or if it's this or that is happening, the long term will turn out to be the best. And that brings us to what we do in Dynamis. We enable sustainable growth in Africa. We kickstart vital infrastructure projects by providing early capital and know-how, contributing to growth and a better life in Africa. This seems to be a little bit complex, but I will show you how it is. So let's say that someone is going to build a hydropower station, 50 megawatts. That costs roughly $200 million. So he needs 50 million in equity and 150 in loans. If it's in the OECD countries, that's not a problem. Then he goes to his banks and his investors, etc., and then everything is solved. In the sub-Saharan situation, it's a little bit different. The project owner needs to prove that it's a good project for different investors and investment banks, etc. And to do that, he needs to execute a couple of studies. The feasibility study in the middle of the screen here, that's cost roughly $1 million to do. And in Africa, they don't have that cash, at least not available. So then they ask a bank or an investor or a DFA, etc., can you pay for my study? And then nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens. Luckily enough, we can solve this problem. We go in with our cash, with our know-how, we execute a study, and when we have attracted the needed capital, that is when we take our profit. So the profit we put into new projects and new projects and new projects. That means that we can launch a whole bunch of projects. So what type of projects are we talking about? Power stations. We were hearing before, energy is very important, and if you don't have energy, you can't do so much. So you need energy for everything. And we concentrate mostly on hydro because it's the biggest and most secure impact. Then also some wind, solar, wave, biomass, etc. Water we heard about, that is a scarce resource in a lot of cases, and it will be more and more scarce. So desalination plants or similar systems we are going to do. And very often we combine that with power generation so that it's a combined good system. Also electrical transport that we heard in the previous presentation as well. And of course for that you need power. We, with our projects, contribute directly into the goals number 6, 7, 8, and 9. And we have very good and thorough governance and measurements on how we impact every of these goals. And we also follow the IFC standards, equator principles, and the performance standards. And by doing all this, we then indirectly impact a couple of the other goals like poverty, food, health, etc. We work with the local partnerships. We involve in the society, so it's not a hit-and-run business. We are there, if we do a project, we are in that region and in that city or in that area for a long time. And if you want to contact us, then please use this contact information. And then I want to thank those who made the sources for my statistics that I showed before. So, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So I have to apologize. We had planned breakout room where all of you were supposed to be speaking, but unfortunately we ran out of time. Like I mentioned, I'm not very good at this moderating. So what I would propose is just please, the speakers are here. Go ahead, ask whatever questions you have to ask to all 5 of us. There's somebody. And just please mention your name and just ask which speaker you are addressing your question to.
Yes, hi. So my name is Guillaume Bonnel. I work for Credit Suisse in the sustainable and impact investing field. My question goes to Andrew. So first of all, happy birthday. I love your idea. I think it's very powerful potentially. But I was wondering, having lived in Africa myself for a while, I know corruption, I mean, in some countries at least, it goes up to the top. And we know rule of law is not always enforced. So how will you precisely address this issue and fight this issue of corruption? And also, additional question, I mean, aren't you scared also even for, you know, if you attack those problems in Africa, you know, it can be dangerous for yourself as well. I've seen that before. And you also need the local support. So I wonder if you have some people in Africa to help you identify, because it's also very hard to identify the sources of corruption. So many questions, but...
Yes, I think I got rule of law, my personal safety. I'm sorry, what was the last one? Local support, yeah. So the dealing with the local, the rule of law, that's something we think about all the time. But a couple of things to note about our model. Firstly is that we are not enforcing in the country by and large. What we're doing is we're going off to the legal centres of London, New York, other states in the US, in Florida, there's a lot of assets there, or in even offshore financial centres, global financial centres, and that's where we're enforcing. Second thing to note is that we take the claims as much as we can. We take the claims, we take control of the claims, and we take them away from the political environment. Governments love that because it's difficult for governments to pursue corruption for all kinds of reasons, partially to do with the fact that these countries we work with are themselves emerging from a sort of a historical environment of corruption into a world where they're wanting to be much more stable, but that's not easy. So we take that away from them. So we take control of that. We have contracts with these countries that say that we are in charge of the claims, and if there's a change of government, for example, and they change their mind, then they can't, because we've taken control of the claims, and they then have a contractual right to return of the assets by us. So that's a large part of our model. Secondly, we, in the capacity building thing that I touched on, we do a lot of work with the local commissions and government agencies, attorney generals, etc. So we bring them on side. We do a lot of strategic communication so that we get the country on side. We make sure that we're sort of, as it were, a popular thing to be doing. Our long-term goal is that many of our vehicles through which we do this are in fact locally owned, possibly publicly listed in country with high levels of transparency. So they become much more established and institutionalized so that they are more sustainable in that sense. We also, by the way, take out political risk insurance against the possibilities of major kind of political disruptions with our partners. But even more important than maybe even all of those things is that, and partly to your second question about safety, we're quite careful with the countries we work with. What we're looking for is countries that are emerging, often post-conflict countries where there is a growing, often from young people, culture of wanting to move away from the historic sort of strongman cultures. This is why Africa is, I think, a great and fertile area for us, because there is, I think, a kind of wave of countries that are of the sort that I described. We're not looking to say we'll only work with countries that are perfect. We're not. That would be impractical. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to help transition companies. But there are certainly countries we would not begin to work with because they are really, the corruption is too ingrained. And that we think that the sorts of people that we're going after, and often they are actually offshore advisor enablers, large companies that have been, frankly, part of the wrongdoing, the historic wrongdoing. So we're not necessarily going after some mobster. We're going after, companies, advisor enablers, and so forth, many of whom have deep pockets, and that's why they're attractive targets for us. But we're not going after the mob, as it were, I hope. Hopefully my wife is not watching this, but we do worry about that somewhat. But I think we take a lot of sensible precautions. We do also have a budget for security and so on and so on. So lots of different answers to that. And the final one was local support, I think. Well, I sort of touched on that, I think, with what I was saying before. We have a whole program of which we'd call capacity building, and our goal is really that in each of the countries we work with, within a period of 5 to 10 years, what we've built in terms of this recovery engine that's bringing in funds back is locally owned and controlled and financed, and so we get buy-in in those kinds of ways. We're very close to a number of NGOs on the ground. We work with NGOs, whistleblowers. We seek to be very embedded, which I think is, as I said to Ben, one of the reasons why this isn't widely done is because you need to have a very holistic approach to this. You can't just be a finance solution. You can't just be a bunch of lawyers, lovely as we are. You need to be, and we have here our human rights director, Chris Duckett, sitting in the front here, who's an expert in that area. We have development experts, people working with Tony Blair Institute, and those kinds of people who speak finance and government, but bilingual folk. So yes, it's a rather long answer, but those are my answers.
Thank you, Andrew. I think Amina has some question for one of us. We don't hear you. Amina, we don't hear you.
Now?
Yeah, now we hear you.
Yes. I've just been hearing about the narrative about corruption. Corruption doesn't happen only, it's not a one-way traffic. It's a two-way traffic. And for every corrupter, there is a corruptee. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes. And very often when you look at the sphere where corruption is happening, it is precisely happening with many transnational companies exploring the resources in Africa. So I think we have to be very careful here. And often, the corruption is happening in extractive industries. Very often, these countries are being denied precisely the tax that these major corporates are supposed to be paying. And when they do pay, I mean, there's a very good example in West Africa where bauxite has been extracted, and this precisely this same transnational company, which is going out there and investing their funds in Western banks, they are the one who have been very actively corrupting some of their governments. So I think it's very easy to come up with sweeping statements about corruption happening in Africa. But we also have to look at the entire ecosystem where this corruption is happening, who is corrupting whom. But the thing is that if you look at the past 20, 30 years, African economies, African countries have been going major reforms. And I think one of the blessings I think that this continent has done is to sign the free trade agreement right across the continent. So hopefully we'll see move from the 18% intra-Africa trade to move up to the same level as the European Union of 75%. So I think this could be a savior when we start looking at transformation of our own resources on this continent. And the other thing as well is that it is always easy to say that we are receiving aid. Well, for every dollar that we receive as aid, we are contributing $23 is flowing out of the African continent. So I think we need to have a much more nuanced view when we deal about corruption, when we look about subsidy, when we look about aid. We want more trade. We want more transformation on this continent of our own resources. Thank you.
That was perfect. I think we will have to, no, we still have 2 minutes. Oh,
I'm not sure if that was a question for us, but I would completely agree with that. Look, we're really more interested in the bribors than the bribees, frankly speaking, because often the bribors, the international corporations, banks, institutions, etc., are the ones that have need to return the assets. It's not to say that we wouldn't be interested in the corruptors, but this is not some sort of global north attack on corruption in the global south. No, it's really and that's why we get support from a number of financial institutions, and governments, and other institutions that support what we're doing, because we're trying to be part of the solution, having places like London been part of the problem for so many years. So,
yeah, with this, I'll try to close up. I don't know where to start with the summary. It was absolutely amazing, and amazing for me. I don't know about you guys. So if you have any questions, anything, still you can ask Christian or myself or Karen. And if you want, please leave your card or name or address or something. Some of you I already know. In case if you have questions, please ask us, follow us up. We do, from SIA, we do a lot of educational programs. We do international events, annual summits, research articles, pitch trainings, fundraising challenges, especially if you're businesses looking for funds, let us know. But as long as it is impactful, because that's the only thing we cover. So I think with this, I would like to end the day today. I think we managed it exactly 1 minute before. Thank you very much for coming. And thank you, Amina, and thank you, Ashok, Johan, and Andrew.
Thank you.
Bye.